For over 60 years, the world has known Rod Stewart as the raspy-voiced, rooster-haired embodiment of rock and roll. A knight of the realm, a two-time Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee, and the voice behind timeless anthems, his legacy is etched in stone. With a career spanning from the gritty blues clubs of the 60s to global stadiums, Stewart has sold over 250 million records, crafting a persona built on charisma and swagger. But what happens when the lights go down? For decades, behind the cheeky grin, a different story has been simmering, one of bitter rivalries and deeply personal clashes that shaped his career and the very landscape of modern music. Now, at 80 years old, the curtain is being pulled back. Through years of scattered interviews, offhand remarks, and revelations from his contemporaries, a picture has emerged of the musical giants Rod Stewart clashed with. These weren't just friendly competitions. They were foundational conflicts, rooted in artistic integrity, personal betrayal, and clashing egos. While hate is a strong word for a man who lived his music, the line between professional disagreement and personal dislike often blurred. From petty insults that escalated into public wars to philosophical divides that represented two warring factions of rock, these are the stories of the musicians he famously couldn't stand. It all starts with the man who was both Rod's greatest friend and fiercest rival, Reginald Dwight. Better known as Elton John, their saga is one of rock's most famous feuds, a decades-long spectacle that swung wildly between brotherly love and cutting animosity. In the early 70s, they were both meteoric forces, flamboyant, talented, and masters of showmanship. They were so close they had drag nicknames for each other. Rod was Sharon and Elton was Phyllis. Their rivalry initially played out with hilarious, expensive pranks. When Elton launched an album with a massive billboard on Sunset Strip, Rod put one across the street that just read, "Blondes have more fun." Not to be outdone, when Rod played a show in London, Elton hired sharpshooters to pop a giant balloon that was part of the finale. For years, this was their language of love and war, but beneath the laughter, a real rivalry was brewing. The playful jabs in interviews started to carry a sharper edge. It was all fun and games until it wasn't. The moment that turned this cold, War Hot was in 2018. Elton had announced his massive farewell tour, and when Rod was asked about it, he didn't hold back. He called the tour dishonest and said it stinks of selling tickets, implying it was just a cynical cash grab. The fallout was immediate. The Sharon and Phyllis days were over. In his autobiography, Me, Elton fired back, writing, "I certainly didn't feel like I needed a lecture on the feral spirit of rock and roll from someone who'd spent most of the last decade crooning his way through the great American songbook." He confirmed they weren't speaking, and one of rock's most iconic friendships was fractured. Thankfully, the resolution came from Stewart himself. Realizing he'd crossed the line, he issued a public apology, admitting his competitive nature had gotten the better of him. It took time, but the ice eventually thawed. Today, the feud is officially over, but it serves as a stark reminder of how their relationship teetered on the brink, revealing the genuine tension that always simmered just beneath the surface. Not all of Rod's rivalries were with his peers. One of the most profound and regret-filled relationships of his life was with his mentor and early bandmate, the guitar god Jeff Beck. This wasn't a feud of insults. It was a deeper conflict born from a dramatic breakup that haunted Stewart for years. Back in 1967, a young Rod Stewart was a diamond in the rough until Jeff Beck discovered him. After leaving the Yardbirds, Beck formed the Jeff Beck Group, a band that should have been as big as Led Zeppelin. The lineup was pure dynamite. Beck on guitar, Ronnie Wood on bass, and Stewart on vocals. They were pioneers of hard rock, and their chemistry was electric. They were a brotherhood on the absolute cusp of global superstardom, and then it all fell apart. Just days before they were set to play at a little festival called Woodstock in 1969, tensions over egos and money had been boiling for months, and just before the festival, the band imploded. Stewart and Ronnie Wood left to form Faces, and a betrayed Beck disbanded the group. Missing Woodstock was a catastrophic move, something Stewart later called one of the biggest regrets of his life. From Beck's perspective, his singer and bassist had walked out on him right at the finish line. For years, a palpable tension remained. They rarely spoke, and the wounds never fully healed. Stewart's massive solo success was a constant reminder of what could have been. They attempted reunions, but the old baggage always resurfaced. The final, poignant resolution came with Jeff Beck's sudden death in January 2023. Stewart set aside any lingering animosity and offered a heartfelt tribute. Jeff Beck was on another planet. He was one of the few guitarists that, when playing live, would actually listen to me sing and respond. "Jeff, you were the greatest, my man. Thank you for everything." In the end, decades of tension and what-ifs were washed away by a simple, profound goodbye. We are just getting started on the rivalries that defined Rod Stewart's journey. From the brother he left behind, we now turn to the Beatle who had some pointed words about one of Rod's biggest hits. These stories reveal the immense pressure and competition at the very top. If you're fascinated by these deep dives into rock history, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Now, let's get to the man who represented the pinnacle of songwriting. To receive criticism from a Beatle was a public indictment. In 1976, Rod Stewart, at the height of his fame, found himself on the receiving end of John Lennon's sharp analysis, sparking a conflict that has echoed for decades. The song in question was "The Killing of Georgie," Part 1 and 2, a groundbreaking and compassionate track about the murder of Stewart's gay friend. It was a brave song for its time and one Stewart was rightly proud of. The flashpoint came from Lennon himself. In an interview in 1980, he pointed out that the song's mournful chorus, "Oh, Georgie, stay, don't go away," sounded remarkably similar to the melody of his own 1969 Beatles classic, "Don't Let Me Down." Lennon dryly remarked, "By the way, Rod Stewart turned that 'Don't Let Me Down' into 'Georgie, don't go, oh.' That's one the publishers never noticed." He wasn't overtly hostile, but the implication was heavy. In a world where authenticity is currency, being called out by John Lennon was a significant blow. The comment created a narrative that Stewart never quite shook. To this day, if you listen to the two songs back-to-back, the similarity is hard to deny. Stewart's reaction was, essentially, no reaction at all. He never fired back, perhaps knowing it was a battle he couldn't win. Years later, he finally addressed it with a bit of a shrug, admitting, "It does sound like it. Nothing wrong with a good steal." The resolution to this peculiar feud is a tragic one. There was no reconciliation because there was no time. John Lennon was murdered in 1980, leaving the issue hanging in the air. It stands as a fascinating example of how a single comment from a figure as towering as Lennon could create a point of tension that would last for decades. If the rivalry with Elton was about showmanship, the feud with Mick Jagger was about something more primal, the heavyweight title of rock's greatest frontman. This was a clash of titans, a decades-long competition between the two most charismatic performers of their generation. The two premier British rock bands were the Rolling Stones and Faces. Jagger was the preening intellectual snake hips. Stewart was the boisterous lad with the sandpaper voice. The music press loved to pit them against each other. For a time, the competition was professional. But things got personal in 1975, thanks to Rod's best friend, Ronnie Wood. Wood was the heart of Faces, but the Rolling Stones needed a new guitarist, and they set their sights on him. For Ronnie, it was an offer he couldn't refuse. For Stewart, it was a devastating blow. The defection of his best mate to the rival camp not only ended his beloved band, but felt like a personal betrayal orchestrated by Jagger. The aftermath colored their relationship for years. Stewart began taking public shots at Jagger in the press, often criticizing his famous stage moves as contrived. He famously quipped, "Mick's a fine bloke, but I've always been a better singer than him." He painted Jagger's persona as an act, while his own was genuine. Jagger, for his part, rarely took the bait, preferring to maintain an air of being above the fray. His silence was its own form of power. As they transitioned from rock gods to elder statesmen, the animosity softened into a kind of weary respect. The fire of their rivalry cooled, but the core of their conflict was never truly resolved. It remains a classic battle for supremacy between two of history's greatest frontmen, a battle that, in the end, both arguably won just by enduring. Some rivalries are born from a fundamental disagreement about the very nature of art. Such was the case with Rod Stewart and David Bowie. Theirs was a quiet, philosophical war between two opposing visions of rock and roll. On one side was Stewart, the embodiment of earthy, blues-based rock, authentic and traditional. On the other was Bowie, the ultimate chameleon, a conceptual artist who used rock as his medium, constantly reinventing himself. The conflict wasn't a single event, but rather a clash of artistic approaches. While Stewart never went on a public tirade against Bowie, the media and music historians have long framed their dynamic as a rivalry between authenticity and artifice. Stewart represented the idea that rock should be heartfelt and grounded. Bowie represented the idea that rock could be anything, intelligent, theatrical, and ever-changing. When Bowie was exploring futuristic dystopias, Stewart was singing soulful ballads. When Bowie was embracing German electronica, Stewart was embracing disco. They were operating on entirely different artistic planets. In a 2015 interview, Stewart acknowledged this critical divide, telling Rolling Stone, "David has always been the darling of rock critics, and I haven't. They look at him as an intellectual writer and me just the opposite." This captured the essence of their perceived rivalry. While they rarely engaged directly, their careers were a constant conversation about what a rock star could be, relatable or transcendent. The resolution is that there was none because it was never a personal dispute. It was an artistic argument, and both sides won. When Bowie passed away in 2016, Stewart expressed his shock and sadness, calling his death a real smack around the head. Their feud is best understood as a reflection of rock's incredible diversity, perfectly defining the two extremes of what a rock star could be. Our final story is perhaps the most intriguing because it was a Cold War, quiet tension between two of rock's most flamboyant frontmen, Rod Stewart and Freddie Mercury. While Stewart had his public battles, his relationship with the Queen singer was marked by a rumored distance. In the 70s and 80s, Queen was one of the few bands that could rival Stewart's stadium-filling power. The two men, along with Elton John, were the reigning titans of British rock pageantry. This led to one of rock's most famous anecdotes. The three once joked about forming a supergroup called Hair, Nose and Teeth, a nod to Stewart's hair, Mercury's prominent teeth, and Elton's nose. In his autobiography, Stewart even called Freddie a sweet and funny man whom I really adored. So, where does the idea of a conflict come from? It's pure speculation, fueled by the lack of a close public friendship that might be expected between such similar showmen. Unlike his other rivalries, Stewart never publicly aired any grievance with Mercury. There were no cutting remarks, no pranks, no accusations. The narrative of a dislike is entirely based on rock and roll whispers and the kind of behind-the-scenes rumors that often surround larger-than-life figures. Was it professional jealousy, a clash of personalities, or simply nothing at all? We'll never know for sure. The story was left unfinished by tragedy. Freddie Mercury's death in 1991 meant that whatever private dynamic existed between them was never publicly explored or resolved. It remains a fascinating footnote, a rumored feud defined not by what was said, but by what was left unsaid. So there you have it. 6 legendary musicians, 6 complex rivalries that reveal the man behind the microphone. From the prank war with Elton John that turned painfully personal, to the deep regret over Jeff Beck, from the public shading by John Lennon to the battle for frontman supremacy with Mick Jagger, from the philosophical divide with David Bowie to the rumored Cold War with Freddie Mercury. These stories paint a picture of a man who was not only a gifted performer but also fiercely competitive and unapologetically human. For Rod Stewart, music was his identity. His feuds weren't just petty squabbles. They were battles over authenticity, loyalty, and the very soul of rock and roll. At 80, these conflicts are crucial chapters in the story of how a boy from North London became one of music's most enduring icons. They show us that behind every great artist is a tapestry of relationships, some loving, some supportive and some unforgettably fraught with rivalry. Which of these iconic rock and roll clashes surprised you the most? Were you aware of the deep-seated tension between Rod and some of these legends? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for more deep dives into the feuds, friendships, and stories that shaped music history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story.